Welcome, Senator Creighton. It is great to have you with us today. I know you joined me this morning at the 1836 Commission.
That's right.
Where you are the vice chair. And you mentioned at the commission that your ancestor was present at Washington on the Brazos. Can you tell us about that? What's that story?
That's right. Yeah. First, it's great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. This is an inaugural podcast event, right? Yeah, one of the first. So this morning, we had a great meeting for the 1836 project and the advisory committee, but I did mention my five times great-grandfather, Colonel Martin Palmer, who chaired the Constitutional Convention for Texas at Washington on the Brazos as the Alamo was under siege and as the Travis letter was being penned and dispatched. And so Colonel Palmer was a resident of Montgomery, where I live just outside of Montgomery now, and many generations of my family have been there. And so he's a historic figure, one of those characters that helped to shape Texas early on. And he had a nickname that was called the Ringtail Panther from the Fork in the Creek. And there's a book, that's on Amazon that's titled that. And so he was, just someone that's within my heritage that my family's always talked about. And I've always had great respect for the fact that he served in that capacity. Yeah.
So what did he do in Montgomery County? Was he a farmer, or what did he do?
He farmed tobacco and some cotton, but mainly tobacco and cattle as well. And he, his daughter Matilda was my grandmother's great-grandfather's wife. And so that, from Daughters of the American Revolution to, the involvement that, his son-in-law and grandson had riding with Terry's Texas Rangers in the war between the states. They were both in the Battle of Bowling Green in Kentucky. And then his grandson served as the first sheriff of Montgomery County during Reconstruction at 21 years old.
And how did they get here? Where did they come from? Kentucky?
Well, there were, it was kind of a journey through Kentucky and sometime in Tennessee. And they settled originally just very briefly in Nacogdoches. Colonel Palmer was part of the Fredonian Rebellion, which was a very historic event that happened in early Texas prior to the Alamo. And then following that rebellion event that took place in East Texas, he settled in Montgomery, which was a settlement at that time, and essentially a pathway between Travis and Bexar County and all of the rest of Texas going west as you took that journey into East Texas. Montgomery was, it's not so much anymore, but it's the edge of what we refer to as the Big Thicket, so the Pine Curtain. And that edge right there of where East Texas begins, most people think it's, just north of Houston and connected, and certainly not part of the Big Thicket region, but it is and was, and that's why that settlement was located there at a crossroads coming east-west and right on the edge of that Pine Curtain.
I read recently that most of the early development of Texas was actually in East Texas, even though a lot of the icons come out of West Texas, the whole cowboys, open spaces, tumbleweed kind of area. But it's most out of East Texas.
Well, that's true for what you say about East Texas, and the communities in and around Nacogdoches and other areas throughout East Texas were early settlement areas for, those that traveled from all over to end up and arrive in Texas, which was Davy Crockett's, eventual destination as well, coming from Tennessee, along later with other volunteers. So, they would have crossed that Sabine-Neches River and ended up in East Texas first. And so Sam Houston as well.
So what did the letter say?
Well, the letter was to his wife, my, 5 times great grandmother, about just a notification of what was going on at the time at Washington on the Brazos with developing the Constitution itself for Texas, and a great cause of alarm for what was happening around the state based on couriers bringing information in to the, to those that were on different committees that had assembled there to work on behalf of, making sure that Texas became a republic, assuming Santa Anna's defeat and the Mexican Army's defeat. So as Sam Houston was raising an army in Harrisburg, in and around what we know to be Houston now, we had our Texas founders assembled for drafting of the Constitution, while Travis held the line at Bexar County for Santa Anna's, attempted takeover of not just the garrison there, but of doing anything they could to find Sam Houston and to crush any effort to recruit.
Right. Well, we know how that turned out.
So we do.
So what happened with your father, your grandfather? Did he continue to serve, or?
He did. He after Texas became its own nation, he continued to serve. He continued to farm and ranch and raise cattle in the Montgomery area, and he had quite a large family, and so his many daughters, and so his son-in-laws became very involved in law enforcement, riding with Terry's Texas Rangers and Company K, which was mainly made up of Texas Rangers across the state in the Civil War. And then from there, those that survived held local offices and actually legislative offices before me. So his son-in-law and his grandson served in the State House and in the State Senate. The individual that served in the State Senate held the seat that I hold now 116 years ago.
That's great.
Yeah, I didn't talk about that too much through the campaign. It's really when I first came into the Senate, it's really an interesting story, and I'm very proud of it. Certainly proud of my heritage. I'm just as proud of those that are planning on arriving in Texas tomorrow, and to understand why they see Texas as the fit for them and their family, because it's very hard to uproot and move, right? You change your patterns, your habits, your school, your church, your employment, your family members, those that you count on daily, and to move from one state to another. But it's very important to me to be a part of the purpose that's involved in creating a future for Texas that serves as an opportunity for liberty and freedom and prosperity. And those words are thrown around a lot, but they really aren't cliche. They're fundamental to who we are as Texans. That was the way it was before the Alamo. Certainly when we were our own nation. It certainly is the case today, and it's up to us to make sure it is tomorrow.
Which brings us to the 1836 Project Advisory Committee, which you authored the bill for that. And what is your thinking on that? Because we've got, 1,000 people coming to Texas every day?
That's right. Yeah, it's following along with what we were just discussing. It's I'm very proud of what we were able to accomplish during the session. Representative Tan Parker had the vision for that advisory committee to be established and the 1836 project to be established, and we worked together, House and Senate, to make sure that it passed. And very thankful to the Lieutenant Governor for making it a priority. And we found today, with who has been assembled to take the next step on that effort, some very talented individuals. It's going to be exciting, and it's going to be a blueprint for those that are seeking opportunity and prosperity here in Texas, that are part of the 1,000 a day that are moving here. They will have an opportunity as they wait in line or wait for their Department of Public Safety driver's license to be printed, which, by the way, is a very proud moment for, I hear people tell me that all the time. They're so proud to have a Texas driver's license. And so what we will do with this 1836 project is we'll provide historical references and perspective from stakeholders, a lot of information about our past and present and where we're headed in the future, what our goals are policy-wise, and what we've accomplished to make sure Texas stays as we all know Texas to be, which is a very different place than the rest of the country.
It is. And you not only authored this legislation, but you also have championed monument preservation legislation in the last couple of sessions. And this is controversial. Doesn't sound controversial when we're talking about it. Why do you think it is controversial, and what kind of debates have you been? I've watched you debate this a few times. So what do you think's happening there?
It sparks high emotion, Sherry, and it's fascinating to me still today that it does create those types of emotional responses. I mean, our legislation to protect historical monuments in Texas, it was a bill that I carried this session. We carried it last session in the 86th, for which we passed off the Senate floor, and then prior to the 86th, I had filed it in a special session. It's important to me that we protect our Texas history. Not all kids have the ability to visit a museum in a downtown big metropolitan district. And if they do, they may not have what it takes to buy a ticket for admission, or to have the luxury of having someone explain, what they're looking at or what have you. But we have public parks all over Texas, and university campuses and city and county reference points where we have so much of our history that is displayed. And those debates, they took hours and hours and hours to get to get through some of those explanations. But that legislation provides a common sense process for removing monuments if that's the public's will. It wasn't an outright ban on making sure that they would not be removed, but it also made sure that it wouldn't that our history would not be disappearing right in front of our eyes, good or bad, based on the political whim of a new office holder that was on a city council or in a county commissioner position, or whatever the case may be, a mayor. And we've been seeing that because Texas has led the country over the past few years in a category that I don't think we're very distinguished for, which is the pace at which historical monuments and references are disappearing and being removed.
Well, why keep them, though? We were on the losing side in the Civil War. We had lots of slaveholders that helped build the state. We've had events happen here that are certainly not bright parts in our history. Why keep this stuff? Shouldn't we?
Well, and I think it's a great question, and I'm glad you mentioned the Civil War, because a lot of our monuments around Texas are not Civil War related, right? I mean, during the past even 36 months, we've seen attempts to around the country to remove Washington, to remove Jefferson, to remove Lincoln. We've had attempts obviously to remove the Ten Commandment monument, which we have on our state capitol grounds campus, in which our now Governor Abbott was, widely covered in protecting when he was Attorney General for Texas at the Supreme Court level. I think it's important that we understand who we are and where we came from, how we've evolved as a society and as a state, and that not only do we recognize that head on, but we understand that we will not, truly know where we're going unless we know where we've been. There's also sort of a reduction to the ridiculous on it, right? Because with Antifa and a lot of the, very liberal left trying to tear down everything bronze across the state of Texas and burning cities and just causing a lot of destruction, they went after Stevie Ray Vaughan's monument in Austin because they thought he was a pilgrim. It just should not be chaos and anarchy that's tearing down and melting down our historical monuments in a way that it disrespects our past and discredits the fact that no matter why they were erected, when they were erected, or no matter what the reference point in history is, we have a better way to explain them. We can erect a General Grant next to a General Lee anywhere we need to in the state, which my bill allowed and funded, right? So a lot of people don't realize that. It's not about winners and losers. It's about the history involved, and it's about what it tells our young people, that if every time a political personality in any corner of the state of Texas finds that they have a lesser opinion of a historical reference, that they can erase it. I just think that's egregious, and it's un-Texan, and it's cowardly, and we should have a process for deliberation on that. And Texans deserve it in a hearing with review and with context. And that's the way as Texans we should handle our business.
I'll tell a story here. I live in San Antonio and around Fort Sam Houston. My family's military, as you know. And so every great general has been there. Eisenhower was there. Robert E. Lee was the first senior warden at the Episcopal Church where I attend, because when the Army came in, they brought in the Episcopalians. And I remember thinking, well, I wonder if Grant was ever at Fort Sam Houston. But he was not, but he was actually stationed in Galveston. And he tells a great story of having to go from Galveston to Fort Sam Houston to get the payroll. And he was traveling at night, and he heard all these coyotes, which he had not heard before.
This is Grant?
This is Grant.
Okay.
So he heard all these coyotes at night, and then he went back during the day and saw them, and there weren't very many of them. And once he became president, he said that he often said to the Democrats, his opponents, he said that they were like coyotes. They made a lot of noise, but when you went to count them, they didn't have much impact.
Well, that's great.
So we do have both Grant and Lee presences in Texas, and I probably should find out more about that.
Well, and as Texans, we should foster that historical reference and those comparisons and enjoy it. I think it's absolutely horrible that the city of Dallas in the middle of the night took down the Robert E. Lee monument, which I don't know how many of those existed in America. I know there is one just outside of Gettysburg where he's on his horse. And I just think that if my legislation would have passed, there was a tourism fund with funding already in it for the maintenance of monuments, where a grant, equivalent could have been erected in place right next to it. And what an amazing learning event, opportunity that could have been for kids on field trips and others. I mean, look, put a big neon sign that says winner above General Grant anywhere he's located. Fine with me. But to take down our history Saddam Hussein style and melt it, or erase it or sell it. I just think it's very very much beneath us as Texans.
So are you going to pass that legislation next session?
I plan to.
Is there something different, or do you think the thinking of Texans is changing on this, or?
Well, I think with different sessions, we have different priorities that sort of that we come in with, and we try to wrangle the session in a way as legislators where we're advancing on the highest priorities of the street,
Mm-hmm.
coming from any town, Texas, into Austin to the Capitol. It may be COVID precautions, it may be grid reform, a list of issues. But many times the session takes a hold of us, and different issues arise.
Mm-hmm.
And so with school finance, property tax, with COVID, with grid reform, and the budget, the border, and many other things that we tackled this time around, there just wasn't enough oxygen in the room.
Mm-hmm.
But I plan to pick up the ball and run with it from where we were in the previous session, where we did pass it off the Senate floor.
Mm-hmm.
And with 40 retirements in the House and 5 to 7 in the Senate as we speak, I think there will be a new look at what we had to offer, and I hope it picks up steam and some momentum, and we go from there.
We've talked a lot about what makes Texas different and why we have this sense of being Texan.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to focus in on something particularly that that other people don't. You served in both houses of the legislature. As we were saying before you came in, you serve in the Texas Senate.
Mm-hmm.
You represent almost 1 million people. There are fewer Texas senators than there are congressmen. It's the most elite body in the state. The highest ranking members of the opposition party are in the Senate because there's no place else to go. What is the difference between that chamber and working in the House chamber, which is much more diverse, many more people, lots noisier?
All the above. The differences are vast. It is, and let me start out with saying I loved my service in the House.
Mm-hmm.
I served in the House for 8 years, and it was just an incredible opportunity that I'll always cherish. And I asked to be sworn in to the Senate in the House chamber. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure, I was a messenger 32 years ago in the Senate, and followed the Capitol for a long time, and Texas politics, and just loved it. Worked for 2 different attorneys general, and I've just really enjoyed my state service in the different capacities that I've been able to serve. But what are the differences? That the Senate is your family reunion the first 30 minutes that you're there. The House is your family reunion the last 30 minutes that you're there. It is a highly emotional, incredibly entertaining, and deliberative experience. Just with 150 members, it's very different than the 31 in the Senate, and you have to eat what you kill.
Mm-hmm.
You have to earn every step.
Right.
You have to build coalitions. It's very easy to burn bridges. It is hour by hour work to build them and to protect those bridges, because you have tough days with every member, assuming that particular piece of legislation that might be the 1 out of 7,000 bills that are filed, and who comes out where on who supports what and who opposes what.
Mm-hmm.
And you only have, based on your 2-year term, a very limited time to go home and explain your conduct, to explain your actions, to explain your votes.
Mm-hmm.
Your district's very small, and it's it's easy to grab you by the collar and say, hey, Mr. House member, I'm very upset with you for the decision you just made. In the Senate, outside of redistricting, we have 4 years to explain our actions.
Mm-hmm.
So that, by the very nature of that, that structure, that framework, the House it produces much more of an emotional response, and it should. That's why it's that's why it is what it is, and that's why they're on a 2-year term, and there are a bunch of them, and it's wonderful.
A couple of sessions ago, I remember there was a kind of a melee in the House when they were gaveling out sine die, and the media, of course, did not notice that the Senate ended on a filibuster. 2 Democrats filibustered against a Republican bill, and they prevailed because those were the rules, and it couldn't have been more cordial. And about every other word from each senator was how much respect they had for the person they had targeted.
Yeah, in the Senate, it is. I mean, a lot of people say around Austin that senators are kind to each other because they have to be, because they have a lot of, they swing a big bat. Basically, the entire Senate is a calendars committee, and they have quite a bit of authority individually. They each can be a wrecking ball, and of course that causes some organic civility among the members to come together. But I have a different perspective on that. I think that there's quite a bit of chemistry in the Senate, in the caucus of the whole. It's certainly different than Washington, where the aisle in the center does not divide us by party. So we have some very tough days, but most of the bills that we pass have some sort of bipartisan support, even though we have very spirited debates, and then a few of them don't. But those that don't are very, very big pieces of legislation, often where there are drastic differences of opinion. And I enjoy working with all of my colleagues in the Senate. It's very different than the House, but I very much enjoy it.
Well, in the last 2 or 3 minutes that we have, I'd like you to reflect on where we started with your great-grandfather 5 times. What do you think he would think about the work that they put in at Washington on the Brazos to found this place we call Texas, and where it is today with 30 million people, a global economic force?
I think through reading his letters, I could tell that he felt like Texas was just an incredible place that would be one of the most special places in the world. And they were fighting to be their own country at that time. And for 10 years they were. But for what Texas means to the world now, and certainly to the country, I think he'd be very proud of that. I think he'd be surprised at your 30 million reference and the economic powerhouse that it is. But for risk takers and entrepreneurs and those with a backbone, for those looking for opportunity and prosperity and a place to raise a family, for a style of government, for principles that are conservative and that respect individual rights and private property, all of these things that we cherish, making decisions based on faith, I think he'd be extremely proud.
So we started out with basically some ideals and principles that we haven't always lived up to, but we've always strived to live up to.
That's right.
It just gets better all the time.
That's right. I mean, we have bedrock principles that serve as our foundation, and as men and women, I mean, we succeed and we fail. We make mistakes. We ask for forgiveness. We keep pushing forward for the pursuit of happiness that we're not guaranteed. But in Texas, we're revered all over the world, as we talked about this morning, for our culture and our DNA and our alignment. And that is very much diverse in those that find us and share that with us. And as I mentioned, being in line at the Alamo with a family from France in front of me and a family from Switzerland behind me, and both families were considering moving here. We just seem to be an incredible symbol of values and opportunity, and a place where if you're going to take a risk and start something new, and certainly to raise a family, there's no comparison in the nation for what we offer. I hope to do my best to make sure that's protected going forward.